Lawyers are begging the Biden administration to finally take Cuba off the state sponsor of terrorism list and put an end to the Cold War. This has been going on a long time. To preface it, look, these folks that are so dead set against us opening our doors to Cuba, I understand it a little bit. That Batista, before Fidel took over, was a terrible dictator. I mean, awful, murder. He was in with the mob. They had prostitution. They had drugs. It was like the sin capital of the world. But he built all that for himself because they kept propping him up, and all that U.S. money kept propping him up. So Batista, when he fell, a lot of the people lost everything. I mean, the people that came to the U.S. as refugees, they lost their homes, they lost their property, they lost their profession, they lost their businesses, sometimes 4 generations of business. So you understand why that stays with them. Yeah. They're in Miami primarily and South Florida, but I get it. It's something to be angry about. But take it to the larger scale analysis, if you would.
Yeah, we're so many decades removed from all of that we're now looking at a Cuba that is different. Yes, it's still a socialist country. It still has plenty of problems, but they also have plenty of advancements that we in the U.S. do not have. You and I have sat here and talked about multiple things. One, the fact that for many years now, Cuba has a lung cancer vaccine.
Yeah.
It is illegal for a person in the United States to go down to Cuba and get this vaccine. Vaccine is exceptionally effective as well. They're in
Alzheimer's. Did you do a story on Alzheimer's?
Yeah, it's either the stage 3 or stage 4 final trials that have shown remarkable reversing of Alzheimer's. All of these major medical advancements happening down there in Cuba, in spite of the fact that we continue to starve them, literally starve them, not just of cash, but of resources. And they're still plugging along, doing good things. Again, not perfect by any stretch, but nobody is. But they're not terrorists. They're not terrorists.
I have never seen such resourceful people, if you want to know the truth. I've been down there. It's just they're just so resourceful. They'll take a car that's, my God, 80 years old, keep it running. They'll take electric equipment, electronics, and keep it running. But the interesting thing is, how has this medical and scientific area for them developed as it has? It's a mystery to me, because there's no chance of a Cuban coming over to the U.S. and being educated in one of our elite schools, but they're the most resilient people I've ever seen. So it is that balancing act. Again, if you were a family member and your entire business had been taken away, your land had been taken away, had been confiscated, your uncles were shot, your relatives were shot for resisting Fidel, it's not easy to get over that. And so I guess that's kind of the balance on this story.
And you understand it on the personal level for these individuals, but at the same time, for our government in 2023 to still be operating as if we were in 1963, this makes no sense. We're 60 years past the Cold War.
Obama opened it, as you know. He did open it, and that idiot Pompeo and Trump came in and closed it because...
So, we had like a year...
Because they're idiots, The secrets of a brutal Florida school for boys are finally being exposed. It's an ugly story that's decades old about death and abuse that occurred at Dozier School. It's hard to get your arms around this because it really started happening in the 1900s, where we knew, early reports, we already knew that these kids that were being sent to reform school for things like smoking, for running away from homes that were awful, to try to get away and have a life on their own. The things they were sending them to reform school, it wasn't crimes. There were some crimes, but it wasn't the kind of thing you would think about. So Dozier rises up out of that. Pick it up.
Yeah, you have this school in this small little town in Florida. It's a drive-through town. Nobody pays attention to it. Marianna, right outside the capital. And starting in 1900, I think, late 1800s possibly, Dozier School pops up. Mm-hmm. And they say, well, send us your troubled boys. We got a lot of troubled boys around these parts, all through the state. Send them here. We're going to take care of them. We're going to put them on the right path. Well, the right path led to a little building on that property that they called the White House. It was painted all white. And in that room is where torture I mean, no other way to describe it other than torture took place. They would drag these boys out of their, dorm rooms, sometimes in the middle of the night, take them over to the White House and beat them mercilessly. I mean, those are the stories that the people who were there have told, and sometimes worse than just beatings.
Well, this quote, there's been some great reporting on this, but there hasn't been enough.
No,
I call this, the shelf life on this should be endless, because it's not just Marianna, Florida, where this is taking place. This is from one of the people that I actually interviewed. The man just went through absolute hell. He said, the first blow lifted me 1.5 feet off the bed. And every time and every strap would come down, you'd hear the shuffle on the concrete, because their shoes would slide as they put as much force as they can behind it. And you could hear the swoosh, swoosh, bam, bam. The same person reported that he saw one of the kids there that was beaten to death, put in a tub after he was beaten to death. And then where the story gets really, really bizarre is they would call the parents and say, your child got sick, and we had to bury him because he died. And so the point is they could only find places where they buried 31 kids. They know that there's far more buried all over that grounds, and there's no records to even show it, because they understood if we can get away with this, we can do it quietly. Nobody's going to know about it. These were kids. They were farming out to the community. Farmers would hire them for nothing. They'd go out and work all day long, come back and
Dozier School would get the money for basically having this forced labor. They'd come back and they'd get the hell beaten out of them for any minor, real or not, infraction. And what really is concerning here is we still don't know how many bodies are buried. They're having to use this specialized equipment, sending the sound waves through the ground to find anything that may look like a body underground. It's horrifying what they're having to do. And here's what's even more disgusting. A couple years ago, I think a little over 10 years ago, when Charlie Crist was our governor, they finally looked into the Dozier School. It had been going on for 100 years. And Crist looks at it and his government says, you know what? There's nothing we can do. Yeah, we're just going to let it be. It said the state report found no evidence indicating a staff member was responsible for any student deaths.
Yeah, you know what? That was the FDLE report. Charlie paid for it. I went to law school with Charlie. He's a capable lawyer. He could have read the report the same way I did. It was a useless report. All you had to do is read between the lines. The interviews that were some of the boys said, this is what happened. They were cut out. There was no questions. Why did you cut that out? Why did you cut out the fact that the story after story where they say we're pulled into the White House, they bind our feet, we're raped, we're beaten, and we're buried. Now, how do you have all of these stories out there that I know they told, because we've talked to them. They told these stories to the FDLE. Charlie looks at it and says, well, what the hell? I mean, I don't see anything here. It was just an absolute cop-out, wasn't it?
It really was. And so what we have right here is these failures across the board. Past government, current government, the law enforcement officials, the law enforcement oversight, they all knew this was happening. They did nothing about it, because even though this ended a couple decades ago, they don't want to get into it now, because then it opens up this new can of worms. We got to investigate the current law enforcement. Maybe this is going to make other states look into what's happening today.
Here's the good news. The good news. The good news is that we've talked to some of the legislators who knew nothing about it. They weren't the idiots that came up with the idea, hey, let's put a plaque. The plaque is about this big, and it's on the wall, it's on the outside wall of the White House, where all this beating and rape and horrible things took place. And it says, we're sorry. We're really sorry. And the thing to me that is the most agonizing is how the community let this happen. We're talking about Marianna, Florida. I mean, there's one red light there. And to say we didn't know what was going on is just reprehensible to me. It reminds me, I don't know if you've ever traveled, you go to a place like Auschwitz or Dachau, and Dachau's in this little village, and in the middle of the village are these big smokestacks, and where people are being murdered and burned alive sometimes. And the community says, oh, we didn't know anything about that. It's just, I don't know whether it's some type of peculiar social event that takes place where it's just absolutely people are willing to put their head in the sand and ignore it. But that happened here. The rest of this story is that this is going on in other places of the country. If you take a look at what's going on in Louisiana, I took a look at the New York Times story on what's happening in Louisiana. Very, very well done story, talking about these kids committing suicide, like 3 suicides back to back, because they are in a Dozier kind of school. It's not just Louisiana, it's not just Florida, it's all over this country. And my goal is to try to get lawyers to pay attention to that and shut these places down. Thank you, Farron.
Thank you.
That's all for this week. But all of these segments are going to be available this coming week right here on this channel. And you can follow us on Twitter at America's Lawyer. I'm Mike Papantonio, and this has been America's Lawyer, where every week we tell you stories that corporate media won't tell you because their advertisers don't let them, or their political connections just don't allow for it. We'll see you next week.